Okay, hello and welcome to the third in our new series of the Built Environment Innovation podcasts. My name's Stephen Good, I'm CEO at the Construction Scotland Innovation Centre. We're Scotland's national innovation centre for construction in the built environment, and our mission is to supercharge a culture of innovation right across the built environment and construction space so we can make where we live, work and play perform better for every one of our citizens of Scotland. With this podcast series, we really wanted to use it as a way of galvanising people to take action, move on from simply discussing the key challenges and opportunities facing the built environment today, and more to exploring how we really drive change, identify specific actions we could take today, and focus on the key outcomes that will create real impact. What are the things that we could do now that in years to come we can look back at and say that was a point at which things really started to change for the better? So whether that's around how we tackle climate change or embrace new digital design and manufacturing technologies across the built environment, or indeed how we transform the skill system right across the whole sector so we better prepare ourselves for the massive changes that are coming our way, or, as is the subject of our podcast today, explore how we really shift the dial and progress around diversity and inclusion across the sector so we build an industry that's truly representative of our society. Across these and many more themes, we hope there's something in this podcast series that you feel passionate about and that you're inspired to take action, and then we'd love to help. So don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple or other podcast platforms, or you can find all of our podcasts on the website at cs-ic.org. So that's the intro. Without further ado, on the topic of today, diversity and inclusion, this is something we're trying to work really hard at here at the Innovation Centre and lead by example, where we can through, for example, our internal structures like our governance board, our Futures Leader Forum and across our own team, but also put in place some really tangible support for the sector. So it's worth maybe quickly mentioning that you can get involved in our diversity and inclusion webinar series, Dive In, that's running throughout 2021 by checking out the links on our events page, and also through projects we've undertaken recently, like Inclusive Value Toolkit that we developed with Equate Scotland, City of Glasgow College and Sir Robert McAlpine Contractors, which has been designed to help businesses across the built environment space to make the necessary changes to recruit and retain a more diverse workforce that will not only have a positive impact within their own organisation, but right across the whole industry. So we're hopefully walking the walk through our own actions, but there's much more to do. So to delve further into what we do need to do, I am delighted to have with me today three of the built environment's leading change makers in this space. Firstly, Emily Carr, Design Manager at Kier Construction and Vice Chair of our Future Leaders Forum. Anne Johnstone, Founder and Director at Fair Futures Partnership and a member of CSIC's Governance Board. And Douglas Morrison. Douglas is our own Director of Future Skills and Operations here at CSIC and has for a long time been a passionate advocate of diversity and inclusion across the built environment. Emily, Anne, Douglas, welcome and thank you for joining us today. It's really great to have you all with us. Can I maybe kick off first and ask you just very briefly to give us a very quick introduction to our listeners and tell us a little bit about yourselves. Anne, would you mind kicking off first?
Not at all. Thanks, Stephen. So yes, my name's Anne Johnstone and I run my own consultancy, Fair Futures Partnership, and I am also a co-project manager on After the Pandemic, which is a big project. So my particular focus is on COP26 at the moment. But my background is in environmental and sustainability consultancy. So I studied geology and geochemistry at university. And then from there, I went into consultancy and spent 20 years working primarily first of all, in environmental consultancies across a range of sectors, and then more recently specialising in the built environment. I decided I was a partner in a real estate consultancy up until the middle of last year, when for a number of reasons, including the pandemic, I decided to kind of go it alone. So that's when I got to the point of deciding to start my own business. So I've had quite a lot of experiences from different angles in the built environment as a woman for the past 20 odd years.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne. So we'll explore some of that more in a little moment or two. But Emily, would you mind just giving us the listeners a wee quick snapshot of your journey to here?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name's Emily Carr. I'm an architect, qualified architect, now working as a design manager for Kier Construction. I started there at the beginning of the year, but I've been a design manager previously in London, and prior to that, working for Architecture Sans Frontières in Nepal, following the 2015 earthquakes. I'm an advocate for promoting women in construction, and it's originated from my time in Nepal, where we were encouraging and collaborating with the community to rebuild their neighbourhood together, and we established a women's committee, and I specialise in historical and listed building, but looking forward to reaching out into the construction sector.
Fantastic. Brilliant, Emily. Thank you. And yeah, a lot of experience there, I think, that we'll pick up through the conversation today. So brilliant. Thank you for joining us. And last but by no means least, Douglas.
Thanks, Stephen. So I'm Douglas Morrison, Director of Operations and Future Skills at Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, where we're absolutely passionate about supporting the development of an industry that is representative of our society. I've spent much of my career within the further education sector in Scotland, where I've supported the development of apprentices and students coming through the college and the wider education and skills system. I think it's well evidenced that we have a real lack of diversity, both in our education programmes and the industry itself. And I'm really interested to explore how we can work together across education, industry, government, and with other stakeholders to make sure that there is a quality of opportunity for anyone that wants to get involved in a career in construction and the built environment, but more importantly, that there's a quality of outcomes for those that do, and they can go on and have really rewarding, rich careers that add value on a personal level, but really benefit society as a whole. So it's a real pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to discussion.
Excellent. Brilliant. Fantastic. Thanks, Douglas. I'll kick off then first, and Douglas touched on it there. We have an industry that's not representative of our society as a whole. We do see underrepresentation of people by race, disability and gender. We see social economic status and academic achievement disproportionately influencing the characteristics of new entrants into the sector. Focusing on gender today, but give us your thoughts on why, and indeed why it's so important that we continue to focus on gender as an industry. Anne, do you want to maybe pick that up first?
I mean, it's important because women are 50% of the population, and you sort of think, if we can't get that right, we're not going to get any of it right. And that, and the kind of pace of change is so slow that it's really, the implications just more generally are quite frightening. And I think, there's even the very fact that women are, that gender is an issue and women are seen as a minority group within construction, because we are a minority group, shows the scale of the problem. Like how disproportionately the industry is in terms of being weighted towards men, and certainly in the UK, white men in particular.
I agree. I think it's one of the reasons we're so focused on it, I guess, is because whilst there are examples of initiatives and various different programmes that go on, it doesn't feel like we've really made in the time, certainly that I've been involved in the industry, we're still talking about a lot of the same things. So I guess what we're certainly interested in is how do we actually make some direct action that's going to change things.
And I think that is, and it's maybe something that we'll come on to, but it's the reason for that is because of the difficulty of keeping women in the industry. So it's not just about attracting them in the first place, it's about how do you stay for the long haul and get to those senior leadership decision-making positions. Absolutely. And Emily, from your point of view, what's your thoughts on the issue that maybe from your perspective you've got some insight to share?
Yeah, well, I think the best way of creating the built environment is to have the people part of that decision reflecting the society that we live in. And as Anne quite rightfully said, that's not the case. So you can only assume that half of the voices are being part of that decision process, and therefore the built environment could end up being catered towards one particular person or not for other people. So I think the reason why we should be focusing on gender and diversity and inclusion is to shape the future now, and think about it for the future by acting now.
Absolutely. And Douglas, your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, we'll talk about the business, legal and moral case for diversity, and the legal case is well established, and there's no shortage of evidence to demonstrate the business benefits of having a diverse workforce. I think it's the moral case that we're really trying to get to here, and it's quite simply turning the dial to create an industry that's intrinsically motivated to embrace diversity, and to do so through a mass program of inclusion, whereby inclusion sits at the heart of every business decision. Naturally, we are focused on gender here today, and Anne's made the point that women make up 50% of our population, but actually what we're really talking about here is the development of an inclusive construction environment, construction industry and built environment. And if we get that right, there are clear benefits for everyone, regardless of protected characteristic or socioeconomic background.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think, obviously we've all been watching the news over the last couple of weeks, and the recent focus on gender-based violence, does that provide a platform to magnify the kind of wider issues of marginalisation and underrepresentation of women in the construction labour market, do you think, Emily?
Oh, I must admit it's quite a wide question. I think that there's nothing wrong in talking about gender, in having it come up in recent in news, etc. I think it may be important not to associate one with the other, but I would say that it's better to talk about these things because it is all included. It is relevant.
And Anne, I mean, from an innovation centre point of view, I'm conscious that we have a platform, and as a male leader of innovation centre here, it's important for me personally to make sure that we use that platform to give everybody that needs that voice the opportunity, because it's difficult sometimes to make that happen in different spaces. So from that point of view, do you think there's particular the focus that we could bring to this is particularly acute at the moment, given the wider kind of conversation that's going on across the country?
I mean, obviously there's been lots of different reactions to that, but I think the one thing it did do was, bring a lot of women to the point where they felt that they wanted to or had to share stories. And I've been in, I've had a kind of experience of this before. So a couple of years ago, if you remember, there was the whole President's Club kind of scandal, the story that broke in the Financial Times. And I went to MIPIM not long after that. And it was really interesting because there were significant ramifications. There were a lot of banks and big companies decided not to go to MIPIM that year because they considered it just to be too big a risk in terms of what if something happened. But in that environment, which is very male dominated, and lots of professionals who are gathering for a specific reason, which is to network and speak to other people within their industry. In that particular year, a lot of the discussions I had were about my experiences of a woman where men had overstepped the mark, and it was mainly men I was telling these stories to, and they were universally shocked. They were sort of saying, "I can't believe that happens," and then it actually happened in the course of those few days, a couple of times. So from the Innovation Centre point of view, I think it is important that platform is used, to give women a safe space, a space where they feel that they can tell those stories, and that they'll be listened to and heard. And it kind of comes into what we were saying before about role models and things like that. You don't want to be putting people off. You don't want to be making people think this is what it's like. But if you've had those experiences, I think if you are able to talk about them, it is helpful, not just to kind of other people other women who can relate and say, well, I'm not the only person that's happened to, but also to men to say, this is going on. You need to be aware of it, because you're just, it's happening, but you're blind to it and you're not seeing it. And that, I think, if just being aware that it's what women's experiences are helps to kind of hopefully prevent them happening in future.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I know from even just personal experience over the last couple of weeks of discussing the issue with my wife, and my daughter's 12, and you had a preconception that she's 12, that wouldn't be something she's necessarily experienced, yet talking about it over dinner, she's recalling countless experiences of walking home from school and various different things where stuff's happening that you as a man, you are kind of, there's a blind spot sometimes that, maybe because you are in an environment where you don't, you're working with people who are trying to change things for the better. You're a little bit blind to what is going on in the wider sense. So I think it is important in that conversation to make sure that all the men that are in the industry are engaged in that conversation as well, and become much more aware of the experiences that a lot of women are having. Douglas, anything from your perspective to add to that particular issue?
I think just to note, I mean, the construction industry is not homogenous, and nor are women a homogenous group. And I think it's really important to recognise that, women who are in the industry, many of them have had great experiences and really rewarding careers, and sadly too many of them have experienced the opposite. I think what the recent focus on gender-based violence has shown us is that there are absolutely the extreme examples which we see in the media and the newspapers, but there are also those kind of microaggressions that exist in the workplace that exist right across society. And whilst I do believe the construction industry has done much to modernise over the last decade, there's still such a long way to go. And until we get to the point where anyone, again, regardless of gender or protected characteristic, can have a positive, rewarding experience in our industry, whether it's the reality or the perception of what the industry looks and feels like, we have to overcome the feeling that women and many others have, that pursuing a career in the industry will expose them to those microaggressions on a regular basis. It needs to stop.
Absolutely. And you touched on there that the industry has made progress in certain areas, but has much more to do. One of the things we're aware of through our work with the Construction Leadership Forum, for example, and across the industry and government, is the development of a construction accord. So this kind of principle of how industry and government will work together across a whole number of different outcomes. I wonder what your thoughts are, Emily, maybe around the opportunity that an accord between government and industry might present or stimulate, I suppose, in terms of the transition towards the principles of fair work and equality of opportunity and outcomes, particularly for women, but right across the whole diversity spectrum. What's your thoughts in terms of what that might do in a positive sense or not, perhaps, and what might the fair work aspect of that look like to you?
I think that kind of engagement can only bring about positive results for everybody, because I think the point we must not forget is that diversity and inclusion isn't about raising one type of people up, but it's about bringing everyone up. And I think it's fair to say that we need to reevaluate how we are working in the construction sector, and I think that having that engagement with government, particularly after COVID, can only be seen as a good thing. My recent work that currently is on hold for the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust was looking to going to Sweden to investigate whether similar ongoing initiatives with stimulated by government could bring about positive results as well. So I do feel that it is something that we need to investigate, and I think it is a positive thing.
Excellent. Thank you. And Anne, what do you think fair work looks like to you as it might be set out by an accord in principle?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, I think one thing that I've always thought about, fair work is recognition of the contribution that everybody makes. And this is a gender thing as well, because, certainly, there's been more than one time that I've had to have a word with people in the workplace about respecting, say people that are in admin roles or things like that, and pointing out that their contribution to the end product that goes out the door is just as important as, the kind of researcher or report author or, the person that's actually building something on site or whatever it is. And that, I think, does come from that. If, again, it's important for government to show leadership here, because it is about that, the people's perception of what gets rewarded. And therefore, all striving, putting certain things on a pedestal and saying that is a valuable contribution and that's not, and it goes all the way through society, because it's reflected in things like the fact that we don't value caring, which has a direct effect on women in the workplace. But in terms of actual work, that same thing happens. And there is a kind of this might be something that Douglas could pick up on a bit more, because it's not my area of expertise other than having lived it, but there are certain jobs that are seen as feminized, and if they're seen as feminized, they actually become worth less and they get paid less, and we really need to confront that and challenge that if we're in this definition of fair and fair work and fair compensation for your labour.
Absolutely. Douglas, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, Anne's absolutely right. I think when we view roles that generate social value, we quite often associate those roles with women. We quite often associate those roles with lower economic compensation. When we look at roles that generate economic value, such as construction, again, as Anne has pointed out, they tend to be predicated towards men and boys who are coming through the system. I think what fair work looks like for Scotland, and I mentioned it earlier, it is about that equality of opportunity. It's about making sure that everyone, regardless of characteristic or background, has the opportunity to pursue a career in a way that is rewarding for them and which allows them to add value to our society. But more importantly, it's about the quality of outcome that is derived from that opportunity. It's making sure that everyone who does come into our industry has the opportunity to progress their career, to advance it in the way that suits them, and in a way that they don't experience barriers, prejudice or bias, to hold back the progress that they wish to make.
Yeah, absolutely. No, a good point. And you touched on the experience in the last 12 months or so through COVID. Have our experiences of COVID over the last year impacted disproportionately on women in the industry? And if so, any thoughts specifically about how?
Well, I think they've probably impacted disproportionately on people that have got caring responsibilities, and that does tend to fall mainly to women. So, in terms of who has to give up time to homeschool children or potentially looking after elderly parents and things like that, it's just a fact that it's usually the woman or a woman that ends up in that situation. So yes, I do think it has disproportionately affected women, and there are statistics showing that women have been affected more, or job in terms of like losing jobs and actually losing employment. It's jobs that are disproportionately filled with women that have gone or are more at risk. So yes, definitely.
And Douglas, you've been interested and been involved in a lot of research in a whole range of areas related to this. But what's your thoughts over the last 12 months, particularly on that issue, particularly?
I mean, I would agree with Anne absolutely. The evidence is there to to support Anne's position. I mean, what I would say is that the industry has, it's a pivotal moment in many respects. The industry has a choice. What we've seen is the emergence of new models, particularly around flexible working, that for too long we have said weren't possible, and over the last 12 months we have proven that in context they are absolutely possible. The challenge for the industry now is to mainstream those models of flexible working, which are particularly attractive to those with care and responsibilities, but to mainstream them and indeed move beyond to the development of models which, again, as I've mentioned earlier, present opportunities for anyone, regardless of care and responsibilities, or even just kind of working preference. That there are ways that you can come into the industry and get a job and keep that job and get a better job without worrying about the hours or the days that you have to work.
Excellent, thank you. And Emily, in the last 12 months, I guess, from your point of view, what have you seen in terms of that impact that COVID's had?
Well, I've seen quite an impact, actually. I was one of the unlucky souls, let's say, that moved up to Edinburgh at the beginning of last year, and then sort of overnight struggled to find employment, even though I was only going to take what should have only been a couple of months to prepare for my research going to Sweden, that then turned into the majority of the year. I think it's similar to what Douglas and Anne have both said, quite rightfully. It's women have been disproportionately furloughed and made redundant, and I would say that it's important that we understand those figures and to find those figures. It's been a huge impact on people in their early career in construction, and particularly people who are trying to move across and push for change.
Absolutely. I think we've certainly, through some of the work that we've been involved in, noticed the massive impact that in the construction space particularly that's happened to young apprentices within the industry, as well as a whole range of others. And it's one of those real challenges, I guess, in a health pandemic as we're in, where some of those learnings that are much more particular in a construction context, done physically in a environment where people are together, have been almost inevitable challenges, I suppose. But it's how the businesses and the industry as a whole responds to that and builds other opportunities, other ways of learning. I think that should be one of the big lessons that we take from this, I guess, is to make sure that if we still, as we do, have a massive need for new talent into the industry and developing the talent that we've got across the sector, we need to find ways of making sure that we're resilient, I suppose, as we encounter all the other challenges that we'll have moving forward. Great. Okay, well, thanks for that one. Next one for me kind of stemmed from a conversation that I'd been having with a couple of people a few days ago, actually, and it was around the idea of kind of visible role models within the industry. So again, our visible role models of women, or for women and girls pursuing a career potentially in an industry, often tend to be of women that are leading in certain aspects within the industry. Does that set good objectives? Does it set unrealistic expectations? Does it normalise the kind of success and high achievement element of it? Because it does always seem to be the successful leading women that are held up on the pedestal, and I just wonder what your thoughts are around the expectation that sets, I guess, for women and girls coming into the industry. Sorry, Emily, do you want to go first?
Yeah, of course. I think it's really important to have visual role models, because it proves that that route can be done, and without them you question whether you have any chance of getting anywhere. Certainly when I was at university, all the architects that were idolised and we were told to go and mimic were all men, And I questioned where I should be, how I could become anything like them, throughout my whole architectural education, and actually until I moved into design management. I think it's vital that you show women and girls at all levels that there is a path for them, and that there is a path for them, including other decisions that they make in life. It shouldn't just be that you can get so far and then you have to make that decision of, do I or don't I have children, and then that's it. We should be able to see various different paths, and that they are all attainable, and that's why we need role models at every level.
Absolutely. No, well said. Anne, from your point of view, as a women leader within the industry, what's your thoughts around that expectation, perhaps? And indeed,
I have lots of thoughts. I think that part of the reason that this might be perceived as being a problem, it's an interesting way that you pose a question, but I think that comes from the fact that because there are so few, it's so important, that it is very important to have visible role models, but because there aren't that many women, when you do see them, and and I know that I am one of them, I'm kind of out there quite a lot, but it's this, the narrative can sometimes be that there must be something really kind of special about you, because how did you get there, and then it's kind of like for girls looking up to a role model, it's like, well, there must be something about her that's different to me, rather than that's a place that anybody can get to, and that's why it's important to have those models at lots of different levels. And I mentor a lot of younger women in the industry, and the one thing that I always try and do is push them to take opportunities for public speaking, being on panels or whatever, because it's that's the bit that you have to break down, that there isn't anything particularly inherently special about me, certainly. It's kind of it's just that I'm happy to kind of put myself out there, because I do think sometimes being able to kind of tell that story of how I do my job, how I got to where I am, it's as much about my networking, it's handing on tips and things as well, and that is really important, and it's not about this kind of, and I think there is still a tendency, and you see it with the panel thing in particular, it's a tendency to be like, right, we've got a woman, and then it doesn't matter. So and that's, I think, what younger women and girls pick up on. They're like, she's the woman, so that role is filled, so where would I go? And that's why it's a problem that the industry still is not diverse enough, because you shouldn't even notice, but you do.
Yeah, no, absolutely, that's a good point. And I know certainly in all the events and workshops that we run quite a big programme, there's a huge focus on making sure that we have really broad representation across a number of different key characteristics on all the panels. And indeed, when we get invited to speak on panels as well, one of the first questions our whole team now asks us, what is your representation across the panel? And that will often maybe determine whether we get involved or not, but equally it will at least have made those that are organising those other events think a bit more around their decision making around that. So I think that's a really important point. But Douglas, just from your point of view, I mean, I guess what Emily and Anne have identified there is that, there are role models who often are in senior positions, leadership positions within the industry, but the importance of being able to identify as a woman or a girl entering the industry, be able to identify other women at a whole variety of different career stages within the industry is vital, absolutely critical, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean the visibility is so important, right? And we'll often hear the phrase, "You can't be what you can't see," and it's absolutely true. I mean, what I would reflect on is that it's a lot of pressure being a role model. I mean, Anne's, talking about there, like representing, a whole gender for an entire industry. That's a lot to carry. And, kind of speaking to women role models in the industry, I know that they speak about, feeling fatigued by it. I know that they speak about, being asked to sit on another panel or contribute to another event. And I guess whilst I absolutely recognise, the importance of that visibility, I'd just love us to be getting to a place where, women are being asked to go onto panels, not to represent their gender, but because they are really good at what they do. And I think that's something that we just haven't quite, I don't think we've got that right as of yet. And, I'd really like to move us, or for us to move to a place where, the gender is just not an issue. The people that are there and contributing or are viewed as role models are there because they have a really interesting story to share.
Yeah, no, absolutely couldn't agree more. Right, okay, so listen, let's move on to innovation and talk about the wider kind of opportunities, I suppose, about how we encourage the adoption and accelerate the kind of uptake of innovation. So an innovation centre, obviously, that fulfills our every waking moment pretty much, and we're hugely interested in stimulating change that unlocks new value. That's kind of our strapline, I suppose, for innovation. How will the development of a workforce that better represents our society accelerate the adoption and associated impact of innovation activity, do you think? And is there any examples maybe that you have spotted on your journeys that you could maybe share with the listeners, Anne?
I think it's what we've kind of picked up on repeatedly throughout our discussion already, that have this kind of homogenous group that's making decisions, then you are not, and you're not reflecting what's going on in wider society. And I think this is certainly not. It's not just a gender thing. It's also an age thing. And you're, as an industry, the danger is that you are building in obsolescence because you're not employing the tools or adapting your training methods to the way that, let's say, children are starting to learn. And so an example of that I see in my own house is, and this has been something that has been, again, really kind of highlighted by the pandemic, that the children are used to picking up iPads, tablets, whatever, and learning and self-directing a lot of their learning using technology, but then they go to school and in general they don't have access to that same technology, or they only have it for a very, very short period of time in a week. And when everything had to go online, in general, in the first lockdown, schools weren't geared up for that. And I think that in all honesty, that is probably the same is probably true at that apprentice level, at college level. And so if you've got a whole industry that is still teaching people their trade in the same way that they were doing 20, 30 years ago, when those young people that are coming in, no matter what their characteristics are, that is just not how they learn and how they experience the world, then that's a massive problem.
No, absolutely. Emily, any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I would also add that it creates a workplace environment that doesn't recognise those new skills as the assets that they are. And I would agree with Anne that it's also people in their early careers that need to feel included, that their skills can contribute to to the built environment. And I think that is something that greatly needs to be improved, because otherwise we are being measured against, like what Anne said, something that is generations older than us. And in the world, certainly post-COVID, but definitely before too, we have different ways of working and different ways of thinking that really need to come into play and need to be valued for what they really are, which are assets to this sector. And the people that represent them and have them need to be seen as assets too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Douglas, you've been instrumental in helping us develop internally our Young Leaders Forum, of which Emily is a engaged member. What's your anything else to add from your point of view around this particular topic around innovation, sort of activation?
Yeah, we obviously represent an industry that has been around for as long as you can think, and it's an industry that's laden with kind of signs and symbols and tokens that are masculinized. We talk about tradesmen, we talk about foremen, we see signs that tell us that there's men at work, or to caution men overhead, and we measure productivity in man hours, and it's just laden right through the kind of lexicon of our industry. But actually, what we're really talking about here is developing a built environment in which every member of our society engages with, and what good looks like is that we produce a built environment that adds value to every single member of our society. The only way that we do that is by developing it alongside every single member of our society, and ensuring that those diversity of perspectives and of aspirations and expectations are taken into account in the design and maintenance of our built environment. And if we can do that, then we will deliver something that adds a great deal of value and reduces the barriers and biases and challenges that the underrepresented groups in our society face. I think it's a great opportunity for the industry, and we really need to be serious about realising that diversity within our workforce.
Absolutely, no, good point. You touched on something earlier, Douglas, about the kind of, we're presented with the business, legal and moral imperatives for diversity and inclusion across the workplace. What are the risks, do you think, if any, maybe that we should consider in relation to the viability and suitability of our future workforce if we do not address the lack of diversity?
Okay, so I mean, over the last decade, probably more than that, we have been an industry that has certainly for a long time has been relying upon labour from men. More recently we've been heavily relying on migrant labour from a range of different countries, but we're also an industry that for a long time has seen a reduction in the attractiveness, industry attractiveness that those coming through the education and skills system perceive the industry with. And so if we are going to deliver on the ambitions that relate to our built environment, we need to make sure that there's a talent pool that's there for us to recruit from. We do need to make sure that talent pool is representative of society for all the reasons that we've discussed already. But we also need to make sure that that's a talent pool that we recruit from, and as Anne raised earlier, that we retain. And I think that particularly in the context of women, we talk about the leaky pipeline, coming in at graduate level, and right the way through, we can see women dropping out of the industry. And to have that highly skilled, highly trained, competent workforce that can deliver on those kind of small scale projects right up to those national infrastructure projects, we quite simply need to have the volume, the skills, the capability, the capacity, and the representation that enables us to do that well, without being reliant upon a small subset of our population, or indeed reliant upon the migrant labour, which is by its very definition transient.
Absolutely. Emily, anything from your perspective around the risks potentially that we might face if we don't get this right, from your experience or insight?
Well, I would say very simply, it's not my quote, but it's been used before, that if you fish in the same pond, you end up catching the same fish. And I would say that we need to broaden our horizons, because, like Douglas quite rightfully says, there is a well-identified age and skills gap. And particularly in the context of sustainability, and I know we haven't used the word, or we haven't mentioned Brexit yet, but we still don't quite know what that may bring about, I think it is something that we cannot avoid and we have to react to. And especially, like I said before, that embracing different ways of working, different ways of thinking, that will come with as more of our workforce come to retirement age. We need to, like Douglas said, make the leaky pipeline stop leaking. And by doing that, it is also introducing a different type of workforce at the very beginning, and all the way along as well.
Absolutely. And Anne, from your point of view, anything to add to that?
It's, we are in a climate emergency, and the biggest risk that faces us is that we don't deal with it. And that will obviously impact everybody. And if we have to look at how we define success and reward success as an industry, and at the moment that model, which is reflected across the whole economy, but I would say is particularly acute in the construction sector, is broken. It doesn't encourage long-term thinking, and doesn't share risk and reward in a way that encourages people to take the actions that we need to take to decarbonise our economy. And we are only going to be able to do that if we do diversify the voices and the thinking that is and the talent that we are applying to trying to solve that problem.
Yeah. Oh, well, watch that space, because as you know, we had some conversations the other week around some things we might be able to do on that front, but that's for another podcast, hopefully in the not too distant future. I mentioned at the beginning that at the Innovation Centre, and you guys all have, Douglas and I obviously directly, you guys have a relationship with the Innovation Centre through your kind of value you add to what we try to do, and we are conscious that we're trying to make a positive contribution, but I'm always keen to ask everybody we engage with around this, what else could we be doing, or what could we be doing better? So Anne, from your point of view, you know the range of things we're up to. What could we be doing better? What could we be doing more of?
I think the more of is just that there is that there's such a big problem around the perception of what the construction industry is, and even the word construction. I prefer to talk about the built environment, and and it's that. I do quite a lot of stuff on the investment side of commercial real estate, and I just find it incredible the lack of awareness of how many jobs there are and how many different things you can do, that even the kind of complete lack of understanding of the contribution that it makes as an industry to the economy, and that the Innovation Centre obviously already does a lot, but I think that's an area that needs to be kind of supercharged in terms of just like explaining what we do, what are all the different roles that you could have, and why it's important to kind of and how it provides a career path for lots of different people, and giving kids something to aspire to, really.
Yeah, and just prompted thinking it triggered in my head a comment from someone who was in the audience at an event that we held over a year ago now, when we brought our community together, and it was around the industry perhaps shifting slightly its description of the roles that we undertake within the industry, and actually start to talk more around the impact that our industry can make positively. And does that perhaps act more as an attractor for people coming in, rather than saying, here's a variety of different roles you might spend the rest of your life doing, here are the kind of things we can change if you wanted to get involved in this industry. That, I imagine, would play a big part in developing the attractiveness, I suppose, of the industry, and attract a much more diverse range of people into the industry. Emily, is that something you would recognise?
Yeah, I would recognise that, definitely. And I think it isn't just about sort of publicising what we do to people who are about to take on their A levels or go to university or go to college. It's also people at all levels. I think I agree with Anne. There's a lack of understanding. I mean, for example, I didn't know until about 4 years ago what a design manager was, and so I always felt, oh well, I want to be part of an organisation that can change society and help people. And I was encouraged to do architecture. And I'm glad I took on that role, and I'm glad that I've learnt the skills that I have. But it was a very set destiny, let's say. And I think so much is also, particularly at that age, whether you can afford it. And I think I would suggest having the opportunity and understanding of what apprenticeships can do, other than just going to university. I think expanding on that, and creating a network where people can reach out to others at that stage of making that decision would be really helpful. So I guess it would be about creating a network that's visible, and that is approachable as well.
Yeah, and that from your involvement with our Future Leaders Forum, I think is something that we would hugely benefit from you and the wider group's involvement in terms of how we try and build that and shape that. But Anne's point and your point around just making much more visible the range of options that are available to people who might think about a career in the built environment is something that's not perhaps as clear and obvious as it could be. And I'm conscious we have a unique opportunity to, perhaps because if people are interested in innovation, they're interested in change, are interested in transformation in any sector, that might be a good way into the built environment sector, which might not be the sector that they first perhaps thought about.
Yeah, I agree. I would also add in that it's all very well trying to promote people to come into the industry. I think we also really need to reevaluate the image of construction that is being publicised so far. It's not necessarily the most inviting image, and I think that we also need to look upon ourselves and really question what that image should be and could be in the future, and dramatically change it as soon as we can. And I appreciate that systemic change takes a very long time, but it's the inputs and your innovation into certain sectors that can push those cogs and create an output and change that image. So that needs to happen as well.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, Douglas, I won't ask you what your thoughts are about what we could do more of or differently, because we discuss that pretty much every day. But what we'll do in wrapping up is ask all of you, maybe just to, Anne, if you don't mind, maybe going first, and then I'll come to Emily and then Douglas. So Anne, what would be your kind of call to action to our listeners who are keen to do more, and perhaps also those who are maybe not as engaged around the diversity and inclusion issue? What would be your call to action?
I think to challenge whether you actually do hold any, challenge assumptions that you hold. Because I know I've quite often had discussions with people where, they say, but I am not sexist, I am not racist. And it can be difficult just to kind of look at your own behaviour and think, well, but am I, what, is that actually true? And just taking a little bit of time to actually genuinely stop and think about what you can influence and whether you are actually exerting your influence in a positive way. That's what that would be my call to action.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne. Emily, same question. What's your call to action to everybody that's listening and their networks?
I would say that whatever you're interested in, if you're passionate about the environment, there is a place for you, and that you should push to see that through, but also don't be put off by whether you think or people come across as if you're not wanted. You are very much needed, and the more voices we have in this industry, the more diverse and it will become, and the ways of working that is assumed versus what we need will become more apparent. And I would also say, similar to what Anne has just said, that diversity and inclusion is a learning and ever-evolving subject. What we would have classed as diverse or an inclusive 5-10 years ago is very different to how and what we may be focusing on in 5 to 10 years' time. So it is very much down to us as well to educate ourselves and continue to expand upon our own awareness in everyday life and bring that to work as well.
Absolutely. No, well said. Fantastic. And apologies, that's my dog that's trying to get in on the conversation here. So, Douglas, to you around your call to action for your colleagues in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we can ever underplay the responsibility and opportunity our built environment has, as we transition to a zero carbon future. It's absolutely critical that we have the right people, that we have the best people, and to anyone who is in a role of power, influence, authority, please use that. Please use your privilege to make sure that those that are in the industry now, those we engage with, and those that will come into the industry in the future, have every opportunity to flourish in our built environment, because we are going to need everyone if we are going to realise the really ambitious future that I think we all aspire to see.
Absolutely. Fantastic, brilliant. Well, listen, on that note, can I just say a huge thank you to all of you, to Emily, to Anne, to Douglas, for joining me today and for giving us some really interesting insight into this discussion, and really look forward to working with you all as we continue to build a more diverse, inclusive, equitable construction and built environment community here in Scotland, and hope that can influence the conversation further afield. Listen, that's it for today, folks. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, as we've got a lot more coming over the next few months, and do visit the website at cs-ic.org for information on everything that's going on at the Innovation Centre, and to get involved in this conversation, wider conversations right across our social media channels. All the links are in the bio. That's it for just now. Take care. Thank you very much, and catch up next time. Thank you.